welcome back to On the Fly. Today we're taking a look at another Gateway to Gold video. This topic today will be Team Russia. Obviously they're not really known as Team Russia, they'll be known as the Russian Olympic Committee. But in general, I will refer to them as Team Russia because that's what they are. They're not the Russian Olympic Committee. We all know that they're Team Russia. But of course, with the doping scandal in the former Olympics, they must be referred to as the Russian Olympic Committee. But for now, I'm just going to call them Team Russia. But with that, I think Team Russia is a team that definitely has the potential to definitely make a deep run into the sort of the playoffs, if that's what you want to call them, but especially into those deeper medal rounds. I think that for sure. They'll either have a really good preliminary round or they'll really have a really bad preliminary round. I think it is going to come down to how many KHL players they have. Obviously, they don't really play the same way in the K as they do in the NHL. So in general, I think it will be an interesting dynamic, obviously, as it is with most Olympics. Either they fit in really well and Russia plays amazing, or they don't and they kind of stink off. So it will be interesting to see how they end up gelling. I think in general, with Russia, they kind of have that split of they're either going to be really good or really bad. I think they definitely have a shot if they do find a way to gel together. I think they'll have a really good team, but I definitely consider them for the top three, obviously. Canada, for me, Canada's number one, Russia's number two, U.S. is number three. But I think it depends on how those KHL players end up doing with the team, because obviously they do play a different style. With that, we will get right into the depth chart. So on the left wing, Russia does have Ovechkin, Panarin, and then in the KHL they got Korvitsky and Mikheyev. So both these guys are from the KHL. So the one thing I would look for is that most of these Russian guys are coming from different leagues. Not all of them come from the NHL. Obviously, with the American team and the Canadian team that we've seen so far, you can find the link down in the description below. But they've been all NHL players so far. Obviously, they don't really come from different leagues. And with that, I think, especially you could see it in the last Olympics when NHL players weren't allowed. Russia dominated because they have their own league and they got a whole bunch of players in that league. And it's one of the better known leagues around the world. So if you're not playing in the NHL, you're not playing in the AHL, you want to go over to Russia and play in the KHL. So I think in general it is still a good league, but I don't think it really compares to the NHL, which is why most of the time these NHL players will start over the KHL guys. Moving on to the centers, you got Malkin, Mestikov, Grigorenko, you got Barbashev, and then from the KHL you got Shipyov, and of course the famous Detroit Red Wing, Pavel Datsyuk. So overall, these are both Datsyuk and Shipyov are all from the KHL. So this is kind of a team that does have the potential, especially at the center depth. They got a lot of guys that can play. Obviously, with Malkin and Mestikov being 1 and 2, I think it is a pretty solid depth that those are really your top two guys. But in general, they do have a little bit of leeway there. And they are missing Kuznetsov due to the cocaine, the issue they had with that. So he's been suspended for 4 years, so he'll be back, I believe, in 2023. So obviously it is a big loss for Russia. I think that they do have to kind of figure out what they want to do with him, whether or not they bring him back after his suspension has been served. That'll be something to be looking for. But of course they can't use him in this Olympics, so he's not a part of the team for this. But in general, that's kind of where their centers stand. Moving on to the right wings, a lot more depth than most of these other teams do, and a lot of the other countries rather. So they got Kaprizov, Buchnevich, they got Svechnikov, Kucherov, Tarasenko, Radulov, Gusev from the NHL, and from the other league in the KHL, obviously Kovarov, Zakharov, and then you got Okulov. So these guys, obviously from the KHL, there are some good players here. Especially from the K in terms of the forwards. Their defense aren't as good, so I think I will see a lot more NHL defensemen for Russia. I don't really see any in terms of defensemen from the KHL on the Russian Olympic team, but I could definitely see some of their forwards, which I'll kind of talk about a little bit later. But we'll get right into the left defensemen with Sergachev, Provorov, Orlov, Romanov, Gavrikov, and then they have Nestorov in the KHL. All these guys are left defensemen. So obviously Nestorov is a little bit of a shaky player in the case, so I'm not entirely sure he will be a part of the team. But he definitely has the potential to play there. It just kind of depends on what the coach and the selection committee wants to do in terms of the KHL guys. As I said before, most of the time these NHL guys are better. So in terms of my rankings, it does go NHL, KHL, AHL, but I do think that with that, I'm pretty sure that the KHL guys will still flourish under the Russian kind of the game plan, because obviously these Russian guys play together, and it was really apparent back when, of course, every NHL team wasn't allowed in, where Russia just absolutely dominated them, and most of these other teams didn't end up standing a shot. But we'll now go on to the right D. So there are only two right D here. So Radulov from the NHL, and then Voinov from the KHL. So overall, not a lot of right D. Obviously, Zadorov's a pretty good defenseman, so he'll be a part of the team. But other than that, Voinov, I don't think will be a part, but he might be. You never know. Moving on to the goalies, I have 4 NHL goalies here. Not too much of a surprise. Obviously, these are two. The Russian team does have some pretty good goaltending. So there are 4 that I'm going to be choosing from is Vasilevsky, Bobrovsky, Shesterkin, and Varlamov. So overall, I mean, these are some of the 4 best goalies in the game right now. Obviously, Vasilevsky it was absolutely solid in the NHL playoffs, leading Tampa to a cup back-to-back years. So I think in general, the Russians won't have too much of a problem in net. Obviously, with Shesterkin as their third, or Varlamov as their third, they're not in too much trouble there. So I think it'll be really good, especially in terms of the goaltending, not to have to worry about who's in net. Moving on now to our line. So I think the first line will be Panarin, Malkin, Kucherov. So one might ask, why isn't Ovechkin here? They have tried it in the past, Malkin and Kucherov. They have tried Kucherov, Malkin, and Ovechkin, although it did not really work out that well. So I don't really see them trying it again. I think the time for the trial has expired, so I think Ovechkin will move down to the second line, although their second line may as well be their top line. Obviously, I'll kind of show it now with Ovechkin. So this is kind of where you start to see the depth of the Russians. So you have Ovechkin, you got Nemesnikov, and then you have Tarasenko. So obviously this is another pretty good line. A lot of goals are going to come from this line, I believe. And overall, these top 2 lines are pretty lethal. So we'll kind of see where they end up going from here. I think their biggest downfall will be their defensemen, because their defense aren't as good as their forwards, and they don't have the depth like in the forwards. So now we'll move on to the third line of Kaprizov. You got Kaprizov, you got Shapayov. So obviously this is kind of my first. This is my first KHL player, so this is something to look for. No, obviously Svechnikov. When you have Svechnikov on a third line, it's pretty lethal. You can always tell when the team's good. But kind of with Shipkayov, he was the leading point scorer in the KHL last year. So I think with that, it makes a lot of sense to have him on the team, especially third line playing beside 2 of the young guys in the NHL and 2 of the better young guys with Kaprizov and Svechnikov. I really like that pick, and I think it'll be really good for them in the end. But of course, we'll still have to see, because obviously it's still the Olympic Committee, or the Russian selection committee will be closely examining who they want to play. So I would like to see where they go with that. Finally, my last line will be Radulov. So Radulov is a player that I wasn't entirely sure about. I don't know if I wanted to put him on, but in the end I did. Mainly because there are some better players skill-wise, but I think they are going to need a little bit of grit on the Russian team, especially with the game plan that they're trying to do. So I think Radulov fits in pretty nicely. And then you got Barbashev, and then Buchnevich. So with Buchnevich on the fourth line, it does kind of reinforce my point about how deep the Russian team is on the forwards. Obviously, you got Buchnevich, who's one of the top Rangers in the league, and by far, these guys played. Although the one thing I would say is I was thinking about putting Panarin and Buchnevich together, but in the end it didn't make a lot of sense for me, so I just kind of stuck Buchnevich on the fourth line. But he could pretty well play anywhere on this list. I think in the end, though, with Buchnevich playing fourth line, it makes more sense in terms of where the Russians want to go. So that kind of bigger line with Barbashev and Buchnevich and Radulov, I think with them throwing their weight around will be really good. And in the end, I think that's what they're going to end up doing. So we'll move on to the defense now. So with the top line of Provorov and Sergachev. So with this line, it does make a lot of sense. Obviously, their top two defensemen, and I think they'll play together. I'd be shocked if they don't. It does, like I said, it makes sense, and they do play. I think their top line should be this. They do have a lot of minutes with their teams, but in the end, I think this kind of will be their downfall. Is obviously they don't have a lot of solid NHL level defensemen, so we will see how they end up wanting to play it. The next line will be Gavrikov, and so we have Gavrikov and we have Zadorov. So with these two guys, I think it kind of is that shutdown idea of a pairing. Obviously, not a lot of goals coming from these guys, I don't believe. But you never know when you put two new guys together. Sometimes they play really well and score you 10 goals, and sometimes they just suck and you got to move around. So I think in the end, what will end up happening is that these two guys will sort of either play well and they'll keep going, and if they don't, they'll probably get moved for some of these other guys that are waiting. Especially from the KHL guys. I don't think they'll bring in the NHL defenseman, but I think in the end, it'll be a KHL guy that will replace one of these two. And then finally, my last line will be Orlov and Romanov. This is kind of my last line. I don't know how much this line will be used. Obviously, it's not one of the top lines, and like I said, their lack of defense, I think, will be the killer for them. Obviously, when they even got Vasilevskiy and Bobrovsky backing him up, I think it's not the worst thing in the world not to have such great defensemen, but in the end, I think that will be their downfall, as obviously they do have a lot of forwards, but they don't have a lot of defense to back it up. Finally, as I previously mentioned, I think the goaltending is pretty obvious. You got Vasilevskiy and Bobrovsky. So with these two guys, I mean, not too much surprise here. Two of the top goaltenders, and then I think without a doubt these will be the guys. But in general, I think with Russia, they definitely have a good shot at the medals. Anything short of a bronze medal, I think for them will be a disappointment. Although I would like to see them kind of play towards win that semifinal round to be in that gold medal game, and I hope that they lose to Canada. You're welcome. I hope that I hope Canada will either play Russia or the U.S. Although I would like to see them play Finland or Sweden. Obviously, those two good teams, and those videos will be coming out next Monday, though not in the Monday after that. So with that, I think, like I said, with Russia, I think they're going to be a really good team. I don't see them doing terribly, although these KHL guys might kind of have a damper on that. You never know what the Russian guys do, because they do have loyalty to their own leagues. So we will kind of see what ends up happening there. But anyway, if you made it this far in the video, thanks for watching. If you'd like to drop a like, if you'd like to consider subscribing, tell all your friends about it, leave a comment down below your thoughts on Team Russia. Until next time, see ya.